Hi, welcome to Historical Nerd. Today we'll be talking about the 7 famous ancient LGBTQ+ male leaders you should know. But before we jump into this list, please make sure to like and subscribe to this channel so this way we can continue to boost awareness on the YouTube algorithm. Socrates, born in 470, the Common Era, and passing away in 399, he is considered one of the fathers of philosophy and is credited with being one of the great minds of Athens. Socrates is famous for his work in Athens. Even though he wrote no text of his own, he is well regarded and known to be a major influential force in the mentoring of future Athenian leaders and also future Athenian philosophers. It is in fact because of his different type of mentorships that we know that he actually does fall in the category of famous LGBTQ+ individuals that deserve a spot in history. Socrates makes this list because of how important he is to Athenian philosophy and politics, and how important his philosophies and his mentorship becomes for other individuals that are later on in this list that have a huge thumbprint on Western civilization. Number 2, Xenophon. Xenophon was born in the Common Era 430 and passed away in 345. He's famous as an Athenian soldier and historian, and one of the mentees of Socrates. Xenophon is most famous for his fight for Ceres the Younger as a mercenary, having his benefactor die in the conflict and leading his troops to one of the longest and most brutal escapes in human history, in which him and his forces fought their way out of the Persian Empire through the Armenian hills and mountains to finally escape to the lands held by the Greeks. It is a great story, and one of the stories that he himself decided to write about in retirement that helped make him famous. Xenophon's importance in history is not only as a historian, but the battle and the subsequent retreat, and how it displayed to the Greek world the weakness of the Persian Empire, which, at a later date, would be important to the Philip of Macedonia to consider them as a potential target for expansion after he subdued the Greek world. Number 3, Alcibiades. Born in 450 Common Era in Athens and dying in 404 Praga, which is now Turkey, he was a brilliant but unscrupulous Athenian politician and commander. He was a relative of Pericles and a short-time mentee of Socrates. Alcibiades deserves a spot on this list because he is most famous for the Athenian military and political aspects during the Peloponnesian War. He was most responsible for the drawing up of the Syracuse invasion plan, and ultimately, because of political events that took place in Athens prior to and up to leading of the assault on Syracuse, was forced to flee Athens and decided to join the Spartan complex. The Spartan military complex he helped guide and facilitate to ultimately lead to the defeat of Athens at Syracuse, which was a huge blow to the Athenian Empire. He then proceeded to work with the Persian forces, was forced to flee that situation, and then worked for the Athenians again, helping save Athens briefly when he took over the fleet and beat the Spartan fleet, allowing them to continue the conflict for a number more years and ensuring that grain was able to be delivered for Athens. He was then ultimately expelled from Athens and ultimately killed by the guidance of the Spartans in Turkey. His importance to history is that he helped facilitate, build, and cause the destruction of the Syracuse invasion, which, as most historians agree, was the big mistake that was made in the Peloponnesian War that caused the fall of Athens. The Peloponnesian War is obviously a very important and very interesting conflict that a lot of historians point to as almost a precursor of what eventually took place between Russia and the United States. If you'd like a video about that, please comment and suggest so in the comments below. Thank you. Number 4, Epaminondas and Pelopidas. These two Theban statesmen and military tacticians who were responsible for breaking the hegemony of Sparta and altering the permanent balance of power among the Greek states. They fought and defeated the Spartan army at Lectra, taking place in the year 371, and led to successful expeditions in the rest of the Peloponnese and also invasions and excursions into Macedonia. These two Theban military personnel were members of the sacred band, which is interesting unto itself, but also changed the way in which battles were fought at Lectura by changing how the phalanx was formed, how deep it was, and what they focused on. They prioritized going after the crack units of Sparta, or the Spartan king and his honor guard, and they also did 50 units deep to attack the right flank and staggered the line. These revolutionary processes and thoughts ultimately were able to show themselves to change military warfare going forward, so much so that the Philip of Macedon, who they actually captured in one of their excursions as a hostage into Macedonia, ultimately applied a lot of these tactics and variations into military, allowing them to build the great army of Macedonia. That is why they make this list and are so important to ancient history. Number 5, Alexander the Great, or otherwise known as Alexander III of Macedon. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about Alexander the Great because there's a lot of information out there. If you so choose and want to find out more, let us know in the comment and we can do a little video about Alexander the Great. But for the time being, let's just keep it on point for the conversation around famous LGBTQ members. Now, what most people don't know is Alexander actually had a male lover, a best friend that he had since childhood, Hephaestus. And when Hephaestus was alive, he actually had made him second in command to himself, pointed him to a number of voyage messages, and even had him marry the sister of his own wife, a daughter of Darius III. He was very important to Alexander the Great, and when he passed away, he went about trying to deify him through the oracles, along with create a large temple in Babylon to him. Ultimately, the temple wasn't able to be completed because Alexander, 8 months later, passed away. But at the time of passing, he was still mourning the death of his very good friend. And that is why Alexander is on this list. Number 6, Julius Caesar. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about Julius Caesar and his importance in history because he is a more well-known individual, but I will talk about the instance of why he actually makes this list as a male LGBTQ member. So when Julius Caesar was still in the process of creating his political chops, he was unfortunately forced to flee Rome thanks to Sulla. Sulla was prosecuting members of a different political faction. Unfortunately, Julius Caesar was connected with that. In the process of fleeing, he ended up going into a country named Bithynia, and he actually became friends with the king there, and became known for developing a very close relationship with this king. This king was known for his hedonism and his also attention to young boys, and unfortunately, Julius Caesar kind of fell into this window. Now, there's a lot more to this story than what I'm sharing here, and we can make a video about it if you so choose, but just know that this tie here is basically what cements Julius Caesar and actually becomes a political liability and conversational piece for his political enemies. Because after his time spent there, the king of this country actually specifically points to Julius Caesar as the executor of his will, and he bequeaths his kingdom, partially to protect it, but also bequeaths the kingdom to Rome, and actually has Julius Caesar execute this transfer over of power, which eventually leads to a larger conflict in one of the Mithridates Wars. But Julius Caesar, because of his close relationship and what some of his political enemies hinted at, romantic relationship, landed Julius Caesar as one of the more interesting characters that is potentially an LGBTQ member. Number 7, Hadrian. Hadrian was the emperor for Rome from 117 to 138, and he is most notable for his focus on consolidation and building of fortifications to help the Roman Empire maintain its control over components of Europe, and even abandoning parts of what we now consider parts of the Middle East to focus in on the consolidation it had around the Syrian and Palestinian areas. Now, we know Hadrian falls into the category of LGBTQ+, thanks to his very well-documented romance that he had with a Greek youth named Antonius. Now, there are other emperors that had relationships that would fall into that category of LGBTQ, but Hadrian was the most well-documented, so much so that in the passing of his lover, he actually established a cult later in his reign and built a number of temples and deified him to make sure that he was always with them in his life, and also to hopefully allow his lover to live into the next. So Hadrian really dedicated to his love and definitely falls into the category of famous LGBTQ members. Thank you for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe and comment to help this channel grow. We appreciate any support that you may offer to continue to allow us to expand Historical Nerd.